I've been working on this,
I think I'm recording now.
Okay.
All right. So, first of all, huge thank you again for agreeing to talk to me for the second time.
Oh yeah, no problem.
You know, those people that will look at that video later, just for quick information, we had a long and productive conversation a few weeks back with Mr. Smith, but unfortunately, something happened and my recording did not record. So I lost that beautiful footage, but thankfully we're going to do a brief one this time around for the second time, and everybody will be able to see and hear our conversation. First thing, let me start with the old days. You know, let's go all the way from the beginning. I know that you joined this career very early, and it was kind of like your passion since day one. When you finished college, you wanted to join that industry and create some amazing things.
Yeah, it was kind of funny when I was in high school. The shoes I always wanted were the New Balance Super Comps, but my parents couldn't afford them. And then when I got to college, I still ran a lot, and I would do between 8 to 13 miles a day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, kind of nutty. So the New Balance 990 at that time was my go-to shoe. I mean, they were ridiculously expensive at that point. You know, it was
Your weapon of choice.
the numbers at the time designated the price point. So at that time, that was the first $100 shoe, which was the 990 for $99, which, you know, in the early 80s, that was a lot of money. And so that's what I ran in. And also because they were bomb proof, because you could wear them forever.
Yeah.
And, so when I got out of school, I was looking for a job, and I heard New Balance had a position for industrial design, which is what I studied. And they had only had two other ID people in the past. They used outside people, but in-house was a guy, Barry Hallenbeck, who he just lasted a short time. I don't even know which products he actually designed. And then the second guy was a guy, Kevin Brown, who was there. And so they were starting to get enough work that they needed two full-time designers, which is funny when you think of the scale of New Balance now, but it was pretty small then. And I was like, oh, that'd be interesting. You know, I didn't know anybody designed the footwear, because at the time, nobody was really doing it as any kind of career. I mean, there were a couple people, like early days of Mark Parker and Bruce Kilgore, and it turns out Tinker and I started it right about the same time, because he was still the architect for Nike. And so I got there and interviewed and got the job the next day, which was pretty cool. And it was in this ratty old mill in Lawrence, where R&D still is. And at the time, it was Reagan era, Wall Street, everybody wearing suits and ties. And I went there, and it was in a t-shirt and a pair of jeans. And I was like, oh, this is sweet. I got to work here for sure. And then every day they ran at lunch, and I was like, wow, where do I sign, you know? And so I got hired, and then Kevin Brown and I looked at each other and were like, okay, I like to run. And Brownie was like, well, I like basketball and tennis. So I ended up doing all the running stuff, and Brownie did all the court sports and some fitness stuff. And so I expanded into some hiking and walking, and I ended up doing all the European sports, because they were always neglected for design. They were always the last ones. So I ended up doing soccer, fell running, orienteering, all kinds of strange stuff at the time where they needed shoes for it. So yeah, so I started out at New Balance at 21 years old. I was there for just over 2 years. And at the time, I was so psyched, because I'm like, oh, wow, you know, the 995 was just getting ready to come out, and they needed some outsole work on it and a couple tweaks on the upper. And I was like, this is so cool. I get to update the shoe that I run in. This is amazing. You know, this is like a dream. You know, I get to design the shoes that I would want to run in. So that's the way I looked at my product. Is like, okay, How can I make it better each time? And is it something I really want to run in? Because if I don't want to run in it, how could I ever expect
anybody else to do it?
So from then on, it was a stream of all the running product from the 995, 996, 997, 1500, 576, 577, 475,
574.
574. So many different models. It was, it's hard to remember all the numbers.
Yeah.
Been almost 30 years.
What year was it when you started? 86, 87?
It was 86.
Yeah.
The parents were like, okay, you graduated from school. What are you going to do? I'm like, I don't know. And then, like I said, I heard about this job at New Balance, and there you go. That's where I started. And at the time, all my other friends I went to college with, it was a very small class. There were only 6 of us graduating from the ID department. They all went to go work at consultancies and high tech, because early high tech was in Massachusetts at that point. And they laughed at me like, oh, what are you doing going to do sneakers? Well, that's not real design. And, there were no seasons back then. It was just, okay, we haven't updated this shoe in a while. Let's do a new one. And so that's kind of the origin of how some of the product came. And as new materials came out and new processes, we could make it better each time. So that became my philosophy of how I worked. It wasn't necessarily tied to let's make it different. It was about let's make it better.
Yeah. So when you designed all those runners, were you thinking, after you probably were tested most of them, but were you thinking, hey, how can I tune it up so it will be more comfortable for me as a technology? How can I implement the technology and the materials at the same time so I will like it, I will love it, and essentially everybody will?
Yeah, definitely, because what we would do as soon as the sample was ready, because we had a sample room there, we would make it up, take it out, run in it, because it turned out that like 50% of the people were size 9 in R&D at that time. So a shoe would come in or a sample would get made, and then we'd take a week, everybody would trade off in it, even down to like if a couple pairs came in, you'd just rotate them and even stop halfway through the run and swap out shoes and try them. And then you can give instantaneous feedback, and you can talk to each other about what needed to be done and how it needed to be improved, revised, or comfort ramped up. So it was pretty cool because it was direct feedback. You were responsible for it, but you also got to test and use it. That's the cool thing about what we did in footwear is that, those guys I went to college with who went to the high tech companies and that, some of them did medical devices that maybe 15 people in operating theaters around the world actually knew what they designed, whereas I could go anywhere in the world and see someone who bought a pair of my shoes that I designed, which was really, it's satisfying. Maybe, and so that's kind of where it went. And then one of my counterparts left from New Balance to go join Adidas, because Adidas had just kind of fumbled the ball in the US and was hurting on the performance side because they had gotten pretty in bed with the New York City fashion side of things, and then they got dropped by the kids, and then they had let down their guard on the performance side, so they had nothing to fall back on. So they hired a bunch of us from the Northeast to come down to New Jersey, which was weird that that's where they were based at the time, but they had easy access into New York City. And so anyway, I moved down to New Jersey and worked for Adidas for a little over a year, where I did some of the first torsion basketball shoes, the Artillery, the Reload. I did the Phantom 2.
Yeah, I was going to say, you saw the birth of the torsion system and how big it became for such a short period of time.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Those shoes, again, have become industry icons and mainstays of the Adidas original line. And like I always say, I never set out and went, today I'm going to create an iconic product.
It just happened.
Today I'm going to make the best product for this sport that I can within this price. And that's what I did. And again, that all of those factors influenced the design of it. But then again, time has proven that the designs were right and continue to still be right, if not even bigger than they were when the product.
They're definitely timeless, and they transition over the years and the decades perfectly. I think they're going to be even continuing their path in the future, and they're still going to be proven to be iconic creations that, quite honestly, they cannot replicate even today.
Yeah,
it was definitely the technology we have.
It was nice product, you know.
So then from Adidas,
it was funny. A guy I worked with at New Balance, this older guy, Steve Burris, he was the original developer of the Nike LDV and worked in Exeter. And he left Nike to go work at early days of Reebok, got frustrated with that, left Reebok, went to New Balance. The second year I was there, he and I worked together on a lot of the running stuff. He was the senior development manager on the 1500. So he and I worked pretty close on the 1500, along with Shuhei Kurata out of New Balance Japan, aka Moonstar. And so while I was at Adidas, Burris left New Balance and went back to Reebok and was working with Paul Fireman, another guy, Steve Liggett. And they wanted to set up some kind of advanced concepts group because Reebok didn't have anything like that. You know, it was explosive growth, and they couldn't keep up. So they needed to start hiring people. So this whole concept of a new innovation team of sorts was new for them. So Steve Burris called me and was like, hey, you know, I'd really love for you to come here and be the design guy for this team. You know, I'm assembling this team. And, you know, when we worked at New Balance, you had such forward vision and cool concepts. And you thought differently than most other designers I had ever worked with, especially the ones at Reebok at the time. He's like, why don't you come up? And Adidas was getting worse and worse, and they laid off half the office one Friday, and then the next Friday they laid off another half. So by the end of 2 weeks, you were down to 1/4 of the original staff. And you know, you were Footwear, so you were okay because they needed you. But then they were going, oh, you know, you're going to have to move to Germany. So here I am, like this 23-year-old kid. I'm like, I don't think I'm going to go to Nuremberg. It's not exactly a hotbed of excitement and culture. So I told Steve, like, yeah, I'll come and talk. So I went up to Reebok and talked to them, and they made me a great offer. And it was real close to my parents. So I was able to move back up to Massachusetts. And so it was myself, and then we got together the development team, and it was Paul Litchfield and another guy, Peter Foley, and kind of the three of us with Burris as our manager were the core of the group. And so from then on, it was about 9 years of amazing innovation, where Paul Fireman kind of put us in a little corner where we went and hid down in the apparel department where nobody would find us and bother us, and kind of
have your own privacy there.
What's that?
Have your own privacy so you can work all along. And
yeah, so we started on the pump was just launching, so we had to do a bunch of troubleshooting on that to introduce it to the market. And then Hexalite was just coming on, and we had done some early fabrication of the Graphlite pieces, and so all of those required, you know, an amazing amount of work. So we kind of sequestered ourselves in that area, and you know, we made some pretty amazing advancements in that. And then Paul Fireman was like, you know what, it'd be great if you guys just had your own building. So he set us up with our own building. We set up a research lab over there, and so we actually volunteered to move off site. And so I got to do some of the design work in the interior of that space, and it was pretty cool. So we were able to go off into this blue sky think tank and just create cool stuff. And so things like the Fury and Insta Pump and DMX, all of those things kind of came out of that era, being over in that think tank area. And Paul Fireman was very funny. He goes, you know, I want you guys over there. I want you to just create, dream. And so it was a cool opportunity. It was cool to be able to do that. And he's like, I want the building locked down with electronic key card access only. And he goes, and public enemy number one, who I don't want in that building at all is myself. So it was pretty cool to have him go like, I'll be a kid in the candy store. It's best I never am allowed in that building. And so it was pretty cool. And we
were allowed pretty big creative freedom then.
Oh, definitely. Fireman was an amazing stream of consciousness thinker. I loved working for him because he would have a vision and go, what if you did this? And we're like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. That's very futuristic. And he's like, no, go do it. You'd be like, oh shit! Now we gotta make this thing real. So
yeah,
because he told us, guys, I got this vision. The sprinter comes up to the 100-yard dash. Or like, Paul, it's not really an Olympic. 100-yard dash isn't an Olympic event. We're like, okay, don't stop him. He's on a roll. And he's like, he comes up, he gets in the blocks. They're ready to fire off the starting gun. He's, wait, stop. He stops, holds up the whole Olympics, takes out this thing and goes, and inflates his shoes. And then he goes down and wins the gold medal. We're like, oh yeah, that's cool. He's like, hey, go do it. And we're like, oh man. So, luckily we had already been working on things with.
So the final product was that.
Yeah, that's where it came from. So, we're like, oh, how do we do that? So we had done a lot of cool things, and I have this crazy sample in my basement that was kind of the first blue sky concept for that, where it had an electric pump in it.
Yeah.
Inflated the pump upper and the midsole and it did some other crazy stuff. It was really cool. We found this Swiss company that made these micro electric pumps. We'd always pull that out, like, what do you guys do over here? People go, whoa, what is that thing? And it was just hand cobbled that I did on
I can only imagine the excitement, but at the other side, I can only imagine the cost of all that would have been.
Oh yeah, the pump, the little electric pump itself was about $150, our price.
That would have never happened.
No, it wouldn't have happened, but it was, it got people excited. You'd show that to firemen and go like, here's the vision of what could be done, and so. Litch and I were mountain bikers, and we stumbled upon these guys at Innovation in Cycling that made that Instaflate gun, and so we contacted them at Interbike and asked them, hey, would you guys be interested in making a custom head for this thing that we could then use as our interface in our shoe if we worked with you? And they're like, yeah, so we actually ended up doing a lot of the engineering on it and created that device together with them that became the Instaflate, which was cool because then, Fireman had his vision. The guy comes up in the Olympics, inflates his shoe, boom, off he goes. It was pretty
exactly.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, it was such a cool concept. I remember when it came out and we were looking at it in the store. I'm like, wow, they eliminated the 5 seconds of you pumping manually to create that CO2 in there.
But that, it's still the interaction of pumping it up with the little pump ball and everything is still a lot of fun. And
oh, it was so cool. It was the coolest thing ever ever for me. In not only on the footwear but anything else. It was just the coolest technology implemented, and anything that it's useful even today.
Yeah, we sold a lot of them.
Absolutely. I mean, it was the bread and butter for Reebok. Once that technology came out, it exploded so tremendously in the early 90s. It was the coolest thing to have the pumps. Anything else, it was secondary. But if you have a shoe with a pump, you were the coolest kid ever.
Yeah, it was funny. We used to use them for barter when we would go to other trade shows and stuff. And so Litch and Peter, and then there was another guy, Alex Jessamine, who worked in the research lab. But we used to like play street hockey, so we're rollerblade coming in, and we're like, man, it's $300 a pair. What are we gonna do? And then we realized like, oh, these rollerblade guys have kids who want pump shoes. Mm-hmm. So I tell you what, we'll trade you about 4 pairs of pump shoes. You send us 4 pairs of rollerblades. And I'm like, deal, because we couldn't make pumps fast enough, and so they became great bargaining chips. So we traded that. We would all play roller hockey at lunch. And then in the end, we ended up doing that partnership with the pump liners inside rollerblades with Rollerblade. And then Peter actually left Reebok to go work at Rollerblade, which was pretty cool. So it was a lot of fun.
the whole pump technology was implemented in pretty much every sport I remember. From hockey, skates to rollerblades to I even remember seeing soccer shin protectors with a pump
yeah.
system on them.
Yeah, I did one for this company called Cardillo that was a hardcore Olympic weightlifting belt that the pump unit was in the small of your back. So you would cinch up the belt, and then you could just pump the thing up and it would take it to that next level of security
Right.
for heavy lifting. So we ended up getting a patent on that, which was cool. And then we also did a co-op project with Bell, where they did Bell helmets. So they did mountain biking helmets, and for the U.S. Cycling team, they had the Bell aerodynamic helmets, which I have one of the hand fabricated samples. And then later on, when I worked at Nike, one of the guys there that I worked with there was one of the designers at Bell, and I was telling him, like, yeah, dude, I worked on those helmets. He goes, I did too. He goes, I did on the Bell end, And so I brought it in. He goes, I handmade this prototype. I'm like, nice.
Wow. How amazing connection.
Yeah, it was really bizarre. Who would ever think, like, 8 years later, you'd be like, yeah, look at that. He goes, oh, I made that.
So what is the first production model that you worked on for Reebok?
There was a basketball shoe, the 360 Jam, actually, that went into production, and I did final tweaks on that. I'm trying to think if Dave Miller or Judy Ringel Close started that one, but I did some final tweaks on it, and then I did a brief stint in cross training for like 3 months while they formulated what the innovation group was going to be. So I did the CXT, AXT pumps, and then it was like a CXT non-pump model that I worked on.
Did you work on the SXT or not?
I didn't do the SXT. That again might have either been Judy Ringel Close or Ralph Cerner, but I think it was Judy. I'm trying to remember.
I think it might be Julie. Yeah.
Yeah, because we all kind of took turns working on stuff, just to keep things fresh,
Yeah, and then the first runner, was it the Pump Graphlite Hexalite, the first generation?
Yeah, I did the Graphite Road and the Pump Graphlite.
Yeah,
because that was kind of the launch of the first carbon fiber pieces.
Right, where the midsole was actually still connected on the lateral side.
Yeah, it was funny because I drew the Fury midsole first, and I was like, to be so freaking radical and mess with people's heads.
That's the one right here on the bottom, right?
Yep, that one there. Yeah, so I got the prototypes of that here somewhere. I think they're down in my basement. But yeah, so when Brian Igo was one of the development guys who had toyed with the idea of the carbon arch, and they were going to put it in a fitness shoe, and we were like, no, man, put this thing in running. So we kind of took that project over, and he moved into a different role, and that was folded into some of our first innovation projects. And so I saw the thing, and I was like, man, cut it all the way, do a separate forefoot and heel. And people were like, no, that's, you don't want to scare people.
Too radical.
So like, let's just cut it away first, and we'll save that for the next step. So it was good in a lot of ways, because it got you to start thinking about brand building and building some longevity and platform formation of some of these technologies, which a lot of companies still struggle with, because they want it all at once. It's like, take it in steps, and you can get some life out of this technology, rather than just blow it all and then you're done.
I remember when the second generation of that Pump Graphlite Hexalite came out, and I tried it in the store once. I think at that point, I thought it was the most comfortable shoe I ever tried on my feet, because the midsole was far less dense. I think it was Polylite instead of polyurethane. And the Hexalite was moved on the top side, right underneath your heel. So it felt amazing when I tried those on.
Yeah, they were good shoes back then, and it was, now it was funny. It was very difficult to do color on the sidewalls at the time. We didn't paint anything. Nike actually painted it, but at the time, Reebok, we fabricated all that stuff with different densities. So when you see a midsole like that, all of that EVA
Right.
was a separate piece. I mean, it's the Fury was built that way. You can see the seam. You can see the seam in here.
Yeah.
And it was crazy. So
right at this section here.
Yeah. So that was a strip that went all the way around like that. And then there's a core. They called it rim and core construction. So at the time, this red actually had to be a separate piece of EVA. And then it's trimmed and carefully, you formulate where it's going to fall within the mold. And then the white piece, and then you trim it again and you put in the second red piece. And then you press this thing flat. And then you made the core, you press that, and then you glued this all together. And that's how we could put in the Hexalite. We had the original name for this construction was Slide In Hex. And then they pressed it all again and glued it all together. It was insanely labor intensive to make them.
I'm sure, yes.
Because we refused to paint. And some of these, if you look, they did trim, they did do some last minute details of painting around the windows.
Yeah, I've noticed that before, yeah. Were those DVAs different density? Were they engineered to be, different density, or were they the same density, just a different color?
Well, inherently the core was softer and the rim was denser because they had to create the
stability, yeah.
The rim in a flat piece and then wrap it. So since that had to get pressed to get the detail and heat in it, it became a little bit denser than what was in the core, just because you were squeezing less of it under the heat and pressure.
Right. And this is what you're holding. That's actually the pre-production, your pre-production wear tester, right?
Yeah, this is one of my actual pairs, and you can see I repaired it when the wrap around that.
When I wanted to ask you, I noticed there were like several different versions with minor tweaks that came out around the same time when the original pair was released. Like, for example, some pairs I've seen had the black outsole on the forefoot, and some have the electric green. The
Citron yellow forefoot were the pre-production prototypes, and that was a blown rubber in the compound, which that was a lot softer. But it was the early days of blown rubber formulations, and it wore like butter. I mean, it felt amazing because it was so soft and spongy, but they hadn't quite got all the compounding down right, so it wore really fast, even though it felt amazing and it was cushioned. So we had to go back to a traditional carbon rubber for the production pairs. The other thing you'll notice in this, it says
Reebok Pump Fury.
Yeah, it doesn't have the logo, the little Fury.
Yes. And some of them, even where your midfoot section is where the ton is, instead of the Reebok and the vector logo, it just says Reebok.
Yeah, and some have the RAC Advanced Concepts logo.
Oh, I've never seen that one before.
Yeah, the first prototypes had those.
Yeah.
We made these special for all of our projects. People knew where the samples were headed. You'd be sitting there working on some secret product, and then it went to some other developer and inline, and like, oh, what's this thing? Or it disappeared, or they stole concepts from it before it was right. And that's always, again, discipline in product creation is hard. People get excited, they see something cool and interesting, and they want to use it, but they don't understand what you're actually doing with it or how you did it. And they do a watered down version of it, and then it kills the excitement behind the really amazing thing when it comes out.
So how much input do have the designers in the naming of the product, or it's all marketing?
I'd say back then it was like 50-50, if it was a compelling.
Who came with the name Fury? Was it you or somebody else?
The marketing guy came up with that. I actually had a silly name for it, which we...
What'd you call it?
Well, I would give them funny names to disguise the project and what we were working on. And when we first traveled to Korea, there were only two different cars. Korea was very early on in its industrial development. And there was a Hyundai Pony, which was a cheap little car, kind of like a Volkswagen Fox.
I remember that one.
And then there was a slightly nicer car, like a mid-level car called, it was a Daewoo car called the Mapesy. And I thought that was the silliest name I had ever heard. So the working name for the Fury was the Mapesy. And we had special mesh developed for that shoe, the black mesh. And it was really funny. The Daewoo's textile division created the mesh for it, and they still make that mesh today. It became kind of an industry.
Wow, really?
But because of the shoe, I called it the Mapesy, and the mesh was for the Mapesy. They called it Mape Salon. So very funny. They don't, since the textile division is very different than the automotive division within Daewoo, I don't think they even realized that I named it after one of their cars. That here they are naming the mesh.
That's amazing.
After the silly name I made up for the shoe. And so it came kind of full circle, but that's now like a standard off-the-shelf mesh that everybody uses. But it was created special just for that shoe.
But you know what? Now thinking about the name, I think it only fits very well. I don't know if it's coincidental, but it fits very well with how you felt back in the day creating that shoe. You wanted to stick it out there and be different and be totally radical and break all the rules and all the regulations. And in a way, your passion was kind of furious. So
yeah, it was funny that I got so tired of Nike. Everybody thinking Nike would come out with this amazing product every time they came out with an Air Max or something at that point. And I wanted to create a product that had that same stature and impact as a Nike product, to go, see, there you go. You're not the only ones who can do something like this. And, that was one of the driving force behind it. Growing up a Boston Irish kid, you're the, I'm the Notre Dame logo.
Right. Exactly.
You don't take any crap. And to me, that was like, all right, game on. Let's have a war here. Let's create a super weapon that's as good as one of yours, if not better. And
much better in my mind.
Well, over time, it became this. Of all the Reebok product, it became the icon that every time you would see like this Max and that Max, and then you'd see the Fury together with it. So it's like mission accomplished, And at the time, it was almost too radical for a lot of people. People would look at it.
It was definitely ahead of its time with all the technology implemented, with all the ideas around that shoe. It was just, even today, I mean, I'm looking at today and I'm comparing it instantly to any products today, and nobody's doing this kind of product. This is so bold, so out there and out in the future. Even almost 25 years later now, you look at this shoe and it still seems very futuristic, coming from another time.
Yeah, I mean, at the time too, this was some of. I had the initial sketch, and then we were working on some other stuff with electronics and footwear. So this ended up becoming.
That's your second concept for the future of the Fury, right?
Yeah, but if you can see it, let me see if I can get it.
Yeah,
it's kind of hard to tell, but the mesh itself is coated with a electronic circuitry.
I now see it in details. Wow.
Yeah, so 1992, I envisioned this smart-enabled textile.
Right.
That automatically adjusted the fit and comfort and cushioning of the shoe, and that's what was going on down in the heel. And also at the time, it was early days of piezoelectric films, and I envisioned the carbon fiber piece being embedded with piezoelectric films, that as you went through your stride, the electronics would adjust and adapt the stiffness based on your gait of that carbon fiber piece, all intuitively with an electronic brain.
Right.
at the time, people were like, "What are you talking about?" They didn't know what the hell was going on.
I'm sure a lot of people will think the same thing even today.
Yeah, I mean, this is the future. You can see back here. You can see the electronics and lights and everything built into the heel counter area. That was the controller. So this one kind of became the next vision of where it would go. And I hand built this sample.
Yes.
Some version of it. I can't remember what.
Would later in the future Reebok borrow that design for other shoes?
Yeah, it was the 3D ultralight or something?
3D ultralight, and this exact outsole design is in the Insta Pump Opus.
Yeah, the Opus. That's what they ended up calling it. So that kind of came from that sketch, and then kind of this sample, and this had an Insta Pump bladder within this real skeletonized structure here.
So is that a synthetic mesh?
No, it's all completely open. It was a cast urethane similar to the back strap on the Fury. Yeah. And then there's a pump
bladder
floating and suspended in there. So it was pretty insane. People just were like, "No, that's just too scary,"
You already scared them with the first design, so
yeah,
it would have been the total finish.
Oh, I have some, so this was the original Fury yellow trace sketch.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And then, this was the New Balance 1500 drawing, all done in pastel and pen.
What a beauty!
Yeah.
I love this colorway.
Yeah, Brownie and I were bored, and we're like, "Hey, let's, instead of just drawing everything normal with markers, let's do it all in pastel and Prismacolor and fine art materials." And we're like, "Okay, that should be different and fun." So it was.
I remember then reading that Popular Science awarded the Fury as the #1 technology advanced footwear back in '94. Actually, this is where I read it.
Oh yeah, I was trying to find that. It's in my
Reebok internal magazine that they're distributing among the employees. That's an issue from December of '94. I remember seeing that. It was the most amazing thing ever. And
yeah, this was the certificate from Popular Science.
Yeah, so amazing.
It was funny. They had us at, I don't know if you remember the Folgers ads, but they had us down at Tavern on the Green and gave us that award and a big medal, and it was pretty funny.
And a lot of people don't know about that, but actually even Shaquille O'Neal wear the Fury right there.
Yeah, that was no fun trying to make those things for him in a size 23.
Yeah, you told me that they actually had to use 2 different molds
because his foot was so big. The pump bladder, normally would make him in a pair, but his foot was so big, we couldn't get a pair on the size of the tool to make the welding die to make the air bladders in. And so we had to make them one at a time. And that pair of shoes probably cost about $5,000 to make. Oh, yeah. It was crazy.
I'm sure the amount of material that went in there.
And it was funny when they were wooing Shaq, they brought him up with his mom and dad to come visit us, and like, "Oh, you should meet the innovation guys and see the crazy cool stuff they're doing up there in Advanced Concepts."
Yeah.
And, we had the Furies, and Peter Foley was a size 11, so that was like the biggest pair we had because we, as you start to build them, we build everything to size 9, and then you build 1 or 2 other sizes to test it and see how things graded out. So Peter had on some size 11, so the only one who was even close was Shaq's mom, and she was like a size 12.5 men's. So she crammed her foot in there and tried them on and was like, "Oh, these are really cool." So that's when we had to make a pair for Shaq. Shaq was funny. I mean, such a big dude. People don't realize like how big he is, and he's just like you put him in a copier and blew him up. Like out here we had Sabonis, and Sabonis is all kind of gangly, and he's tall, but he's not proportioned normally.
Right.
That's just like you took a person and just made him huge. And I'll never forget when he got his car. He had a Ford Crown Victoria that he took the front seats out of and actually sat in the back seat and drove it from there because that fit him. It was crazy.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was funny. I had this picture. When did I think? Yeah, I've got it labeled as in London in 1998. So.
Oh, yes.
I thought it was funny that there's the Fury and the 574s being sold together.
All together, yes.
Competing against my own designs. It was pretty funny.
I know, it's amazing. It's funny. Look, I even keep some of my tags from apparel. This is from Shock Apparel.
That's a keeper.
That's back from '94. And this is my ultimate keychain of labels from Reebok, from Aerostep to Indy 500, 5000 for the tennis. And then I have a microfiber for apparel.
Oh, nice.
Insta Pump Fury technology explanation, all the other older explanations, and then the Hexalite through all the different years. This one is actually made in Korea, along with the shoes.
Do you have one of the Hexalite keychains?
Yes, I do. I have all of them, actually. And hard court, even with the explanation of the technology of the shoe inside.
Oh, nice.
So, and these are the ones that you and I actually talked about before.
Yeah.
They used to be supplied in every single box of shoes with all the technology explained and everything else. Unfortunately, not anymore. But this is how I learned a lot of these things, about the technology and what's coming because of these.
Yeah, I mean, that's why they were there. Just get people excited about what's going on inside the product.
And this one is from '93, and there's the Fury on the front of it.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one.
And the older one actually features that one-time model, the Pump High 2 that had the 2 chambers where you switch in the back.
Oh, yeah, that one was funny.
Pumps the all around and then pumps the bottom of it.
That was a hard product to do because it had to turn it off and squeeze it.
Very hard, and I remember it was probably the most expensive at the time. There was no other more expensive basketball shoe at the time.
Yeah, I mean, people forget, the original pump shoe was $170. It wasn't cheap. I was trying to find.
There's the DMX. No, a lot of people don't realize that they actually started from this dynamic cushioning system.
Yeah,
which was originally intended for walking, I think, right?
Yeah, it was a system that we licensed called Energir, and one of the things that we were like, okay, we're paying this guy a ton of money for this Energir license. What can we do that gives the same flavor and feeling that ends up being our proprietary system? So that's when we took it, and Lich and I had gone to see GE Plastics to go look at this material called low modulus. That's what the long name was for, but they called it low mod. And they had this blow molded container to show, how the thing molded. And Lich and I looked at it. We put our finger over the end of it and squeezed it, and we're like, well, this is cool because you create like a cushioning bubble.
Right.
And it wasn't like Nike Air where it was pressurized. It was ambient air. And so squeezed one end and it went to the other side, and we both looked at each other like, holy shit, I think this is it. If we built something like this inside the midsole, so I went back and started sketching and created DMX. And so when you stepped on the forefoot, the air was delayed slightly and transferred to the heel, and vice versa as you went through gait. And we sold, not many people know it, but we made all of those in the U.S. as well, in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Yeah, I wonder, that's probably one of the reasons why they don't use it anymore today, even on the retro models. Probably the technology is way too expensive to produce and be accurate, right?
Well, it was, one of the things we wanted to do, because at the time we called our Advanced Concepts group ACG, before Nike had come out with all conditions gear for the outdoor product. And people within Reebok called us the Any Cost Group, because all of
No matter of the cost.
Yeah, because the pump wasn't cheap. So when we come up with these technologies, everything was expensive, and we're like, man, we're getting a bad rap for this. Why don't we create a cool price point technology in the $65 retail range? And so that's when we were like, well, if we take the licensing fee we're paying for that Energy Air, and we made a midsole that was competitive to that, and then we make all the money. So those things were only $1.25 a pair. So very cheap technology.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it allowed us to introduce it at $65 to $70 retail, and we sold 14 million pairs of them, which was pretty crazy.
So what do you think? Why they're not still using it today if it's not there?
Yeah, I don't know. I think they look at it as they've moved beyond it, and I don't really know. You never know. I mean, it was a comfortable thing, and people just absolutely loved it. Super comfortable.
Especially considering all the retros they pushed out in the last couple of years with that technology. From Iverson shoes to the runners. The '97, the original DMX 10. None of them actually had the actual technology inside. It was just mimicking it outside, but there was no air inside those.
Oh, interesting. I never saw any of the reissues, so I don't know.
Yeah, I have a tons of them, but I'm a witness that I know how that shoe felt back in the day, and now trying it again, completely, it feels like a brick basically. There's no air transitioning. You cannot feel the air transitioning. Back in the day, you can go and just rock back and forward in the shoes, and you can feel it moving back and forward.
Yeah, it was funny. The first ones, they nicknamed the part, the guy John Morgan, who was the head of marketing, nicknamed that part the Crawdaddy because it looked kind of like a crawfish. And I'm like, all right, call it whatever you want. But we designed it for running and fast-moving sports. Because basically when you had a large volume of air like you had in the walking one, when you went running in it, the air starts to move really fast back and forth, and it heats up.
Yeah.
What would happen is that thing...
It's friction, yeah.
Well, it would heat up, and then it would inflate and expand and get rigid. So it wasn't right for, lower profile and running sports. So that's why we came up with the multiple chamber one.
Mm-hmm.
It allowed the air to take its time wandering around through those different passages, and it didn't heat up and travel as fast. And
I always thought what was the idea behind creating the 10 different chambers, but now I can finally find out.
Yeah, and so when we made the first parts, people like, well, it doesn't feel like the walking shoe. It's like, well, you've cut the height in half, and it's like it's never going to feel like the walking shoe because biometrically, it's not possible for that thing to work in running sports, And it was too soft. The travel was too high, and so everybody's like, well, it used to be dramatic like that. So we took some of the technology that we had from the Insta Pump, and we built a very thin ambient layer of film above it that had a forefoot and heel in it that gave you that same kind of feeling as what you had in the walking shoe on top of the sole. Then it was directly against your foot. So it ended up being a two-stage system. So you had the one for the in-store feel of the, It was funny, when we first came out with it, these women in the walking shoes described it as like stepping on a small dead animal. And I was like, well, that's a weird thing. Like, it feels good though, but that's what it feels like. When you step on like a mouse or something, you're like, I haven't stepped on too many, but I trust your word on that. And so we kind of needed to maintain that feel, and that's when we came up with that two-stage system. So I don't know if they're doing that. And, the issue may not have that in it. The other parts, again, were made in Worcester. So who knows? I mean, they may have knocked it off in China and dumbed it down.
I think that's what they're doing. They're going to the extreme cheap route. Then I remember there was the DMX Lite where it had one big chamber in the forefoot and then 4 on the heel or 5 on the heel.
That was supposed to be the takedown model of it.
Yeah.
So we look, again, when you look back at those early days of tiering and price point, and okay, if we build this one here, we can come out with the cheaper one the next season and not dumb it down. And so you build the ultimate first and then build levels below it. So you kind of plan for several years of the technology life.
What about the 3D Ultralight? How did that idea came out?
You know, there's another guy, Mike Bronger, and he worked for DuPont. He was one of the original chemists on building blown EVA, as well as there were some Italian companies experimenting with injection EVA. So we wanted to build this injection EVA bottom unit. So at the time, you know, this one we were pouring as polyurethane, and then injection EVA came out. Like, oh my God, that's the perfect way to do it. You know, boom, one shot. You make all these pieces. You kind of trim it and glue it on, and so that was kind of the origins of that. We were kind of the first company.
Yeah, because it eliminated the separation of midsole and outsole. It was all one piece.
Yeah, it was pretty tricky to do. You know, that process took some refinement to do. So I left just as that was launching, and then Nike was figuring out what to do with injection EVA. So I tried to help the developers with solving some of the problems they were having. So if you don't get that process just right and get all the air out of the mold, you end up with burning and little brown spots and things.
Right.
Trying to tell them, look, if you need to do this, you need to vent it here, you need to use nitrogen to purge the mold before the part's shot each time. And they're like, oh, what do you know? You're just a designer. And I'm like, well, you know, I'm a different kind of designer. You know, I had an engineering.
Not sure I got one.
And it's like, I was hands-on working on with the chemist developing this process. I'm not the typical designer. Like, you don't know anything. I'm like, okay, fine. You repeat the same mistakes that I'm trying to help you get over 6 months from now. So yeah. Some of that attitude was kind of frustrating at times, where you're like, you know, I'm trying to help. You know, you're just going to discount me because you think I'm just a designer as opposed to someone with an engineering mindset as well and the experience on it. That was one of the things interesting about Nike. It's so compartmentalized that you don't necessarily get to do other things, but in smaller teams and smaller groups, you have to do more of it. It was kind of funny. I was digging around for this one. This is my old Reebok trade show name tag.
Oh yeah, that is so cool. So what was the last shoe you worked on for Reebok? Do you remember?
You know, it was a DMX basketball shoe. It was going to be an Iverson, but then it got launched at the All-Star game. I can't remember what it was called. I'd have to look it up.
Was it part of his signature line, or was it just a separate one?
No, you know, I originally designed it as an Iverson, and then it got distorted and changed into something completely different.
Right.
I've got a lot of cool sketches I had done as Iverson shoes.
I found my very first Reebok that I have ever bought with my own money.
Oh, those are nicely beat. That's not an Aztec, is it?
Yeah, that's the Aztec.
Yeah. I had a cool pair of those that
almost completely destroyed and falling apart, but that's, you know, something that I will always keep because it's the very first shoe I bought with my own money back in the day.
Nice. Got some good wear on them.
Right after the Fury, that's my second favorite runner from Reebok. And I know that the Mr. Cerner actually created this one, right?
Yeah, I think Ralphie worked on that one.
Actually found a perfectly brand new pair on eBay like a couple years back, but this is the black pair, and here it is. This one is like completely new, haven't been touched, completely wearable on top of that.
Nice. I had a pair like that, brand new in the box, that were in the Kenyan flag colors, but I sold them on eBay.
I remember that colorway was amazing. Yeah, these were so comfortable. I remember when they came out, and at the time I had just enough money to buy them. I tried them in the store, and I was like, yep, that's it. They felt literally like pillows for my feet back in the day.
Yeah, that was funny. That was the go-to shoe for all of my in-laws. My father-in-law, my brother-in-laws all love that shoe. And then Reebok changed it
Yeah, they did a lot of dramatic changes for the later generations of that shoe. And this is one of my favorite basketball shoes, also in a perfectly wearable condition.
Oh yeah, what was that one called?
That's the Vertical 3.
The Vert. I think E. Scott Morris might have done that one. I can't remember.
This particular colorway was worn by Sean Kemp on the All-Star game before he actually received his first signature, the Kamikaze.
Yeah, Johnny Morris did the Kamikazes. He's a character.
The Kamikaze is my all-time favorite basketball shoe. That was amazing design. It was like not as outgoing and futuristic and great like yours, but it was definitely the second around the same time, because they came around the same time, 94, 95. And both models and a few other ones that came at the same time literally, in my mind, dominated the market because it was so amazingly designed, and they were so different than anything else in the market at the time.
Yeah, Johnny did the Kemp and he did the Shaqnosis, which is a funny one too.
Oh, I love that too. That's my second favorite Shaq signature model after the first one, the crouching poodle.
Yeah, the Shaq one. It was funny when Shaq did MTV Cribs. You know, if you ever saw that episode, and he goes into his back closet and he gets out his favorite pair of shoes that they ever did, and it was the Shaqnosis. I called up Johnny Morris back in Boston. I'm like, dude, you gotta watch MTV Cribs. Shaq's got your shoe in his closet. Said it's his favorite one he ever made.
Yeah, that was a good shoe. I actually, it was the last season that Shaq spent with Orlando, and I loved Orlando back in those days. I think their whole team was amazing, and his shoes was amazing. Penny Hardaway's was amazing. All the lineup they're having there, they had some amazing shoes. And I like the team a lot, but at the same time, I equally love the shoes they were wearing. So, after that, Reebok created some of those more outgoing, weird ones, like the Dunk Mob and the Preacher for him.
Yeah.
With the huge visible Hexalite windows on the side.
Yeah, we were kind of against some of that because it's supposed to be an underfoot cushioning system. It's not supposed to go on the side, We only put it on the side in the Fury because people were like, "You got to see it." And we're like, "All right, we'll put in a little slice."
Yeah, it was. People realize that it's a more of a show to just display it, but it was not really functional. But at the same time, it had its charms. But yeah. But the Fury was definitely different because it was the first one to actually show it on the side, and everybody liked that.
Yeah, the only thing is, again, the way the structure works, it was meant for horizontal movement, not vertical.
Exactly.
But yeah. We caved to marketing. We're like, all right, we'll put two little slices in there.
They're literally very small. They're like about this big.
Yeah, it's to save a little money. That stuff was expensive.
You mentioned before that along with the Graphlite, both were made in the USA by that company called Hextech, right?
Hexcel.
Hexcel, okay.
Hexcel, and so they made the Hexalite for us. They made the same process they used to make helicopter blades for Sikorsky.
Wow.
They used the same machines to make the Hexalite, and then the carbon fiber arches, the Graphlite, were, like I told you the first time we talked, it was pretty cool working on that product with Hexcel because we were kind of the first to get into that business from sporting goods. And the guys I got to work with at Hexcel were the same guys. They were older, and they actually worked on the SR-71s. So it was pretty cool to work with aerospace guys who had built, one of the coolest planes of all time to be making shoe parts, which I thought was pretty ironic.
It is definitely amazing. I mean, when you think of it, coming from aviation, military applications to simple footwear application.
That was the thing that we did well. Litch and Foley and I, we would go to industries and trade shows outside of our business. So we ended up going to medical device and aerospace and cycling and motorsports and different things to get the ideas and get the materials from, because it was the really early days of those cutting edge materials and being able to apply it into footwear. I think that's one of the things Reebok was really great at, was being very open to, we would try anything, you know?
Yeah. And later you spent some short time with Fila too, right?
Yeah, you know, Fila set up a small kind of blue sky innovation team, and that's how I got out to Oregon. A lot of those guys came from Nike, and they were like, you think more like us rather than the East Coast Fila guys, which was very New York and fashion oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And so they moved me out to the office out here. And then Fila was, I got to work on some of the Grant Hill projects with Grant Hill, which was cool. And I worked on the whole 2A cushioning system and the future versions of that. We just did so much concept stuff that the company was in kind of bad financial straits.
Yeah.
They couldn't absorb it, and they also they weren't willing to take the risk to use a lot of that stuff.
So do you remember what 2A standard for? Because I read a lot of information that's different. You know, some places say 2A stands for 2-air.
No, it's for 2 actions. So you had the 2 systems. So again, you had an ambient pressure container with the thermoplastic urethane pods in there.
Mm-hmm.
So the pods were 1 action of like a buffer, and then the ambient air-filled container was kind of this cushion. So it was similar to like a 2-stage shock, you know, and a shock on a motorcycle or a car, where you have 2 different grades of shock.
Later on, I remember right before they really fell off the wagon and they started having a huge problems, they had a new one called 3A.
Yeah, I don't remember what that. I'd have to look that one up. That must have been after me.
Yeah.
Still struggling to.
It was for a short period of time, and after that, I think they just completely, you know, almost entirely disappeared from the market.
Yeah, it's funny. They got sold a few times. They got sold to a big investment firm, Cerebus, that actually owned Chrysler later, briefly. And then after that, they got sold to the factory network in Korea that used to make their product. And that's who owns them now, is the Korean factories that used to make Fila. They bought the brand and they kind of sell them as like an in-house brand through Big Five and a couple other smaller retailers. It was kind of sad because it had huge potential.
Very sad. I was a huge fan of Fila. I think in the early 90s they had some very unique and different products, and they were well accepted, you know, among the younger generation, which I was part of at that time. So later when they started disappearing, it was kind of sad.
Yeah, they let go of mostly everybody but 5 of us, and the last 5 of us that kind of stayed out here. And I ended up working out of my house for the last 6 months. And then
you made an in-house office.
Yeah, so this kind of same one I'm in right now. So
yeah, exactly.
And then I ended up getting into Nike.
Yeah, so that was my final stage. You were getting into Nike and started working with them. Funny, just before you proceed, I don't know if you saw it, but they just announced that the Air Max 2009 is going to be reissued this year.
Oh yeah, that's funny. Here's the original development sample of it right here.
Yes, I love it. I mean, the way you created this whole bottom, the tooling, they're even using it even today in the latest Air Max models.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, you know, again, if you know the history of Air, most of these Air units had a 3-year lifespan, and this thing's been out, what is it now, 6, 7, well, when we created it, this thing's...
Some of them lasted quite a long time, although the expectation was shorter, but some of them lasted.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the date.
So do you think it was really the environmental reasons they moved away from the old gas and now they're using the nitrogen today?
Yeah, you know, the original one was Freon based. It was a large molecule gas, and in Rudy's original patent, it talks about a large molecule gas. And the reason it does that is because of the nature of urethane films, real air is a smaller molecule and it can permeate through the film and lose pressure over time. So they needed to use a large molecule of gas that was bigger than the molecular level structure of the polyurethane so that it wouldn't escape and permeate. And the original ones were Freon, and then they ended up going to nitrogen because, again, it was a larger molecular structure and couldn't permeate the bag.
Right.
The other thing that they've done with this is, and it was one of the things we were experimenting at Reebok later on in the pump, is it's a multi-layer film. So one of the ways to create it is there's urethane, then a barrier, then urethane, then a barrier. So it's multi-layered. Time we were working on stuff at Reebok with DMX to keep the air within it, we were looking at Saran. So we talked to Dow and went out to Dow Chemical in Midland, Michigan to talk to their Saran division, because Saran does not allow air to permeate at all. It just doesn't stretch as much like a urethane. So that's why it's thin micro layers of a Saran-like material sandwiched between thin layers of the urethane.
What's interesting though is, and this is probably not only my opinion, but probably everybody's that remembers the Air Max as a concept from the early days, and the way it felt when you put it on, it was a lot more responsive and comfortable than what feels today when they use nitrogen, and they use a lot smaller chambers compared to the old ones, and it's just a lot harder and takes a long time to break in.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is it was the early days of it. So, a lot of the times you don't exactly know what you're doing at 100%. So they could go thinner with the films. Things would get punctured, they'd get returned. So then, development and engineering go, we got to make it thicker so it can't get punctured, so it gets thicker, so it gets stiffer.
Yeah.
So a lot of inline changes that you do that end up watering the thing down from the original launch just because you don't know what you don't know till the product's out there. That happens with a lot of things. I mean, that's what happened with that second generation of Fury, is people didn't, some people wanted to change it. They didn't know what we actually did when we created it, so they just changed it for change's sake rather than to change it to make it better. They just changed it to make it different.
Yeah, and they went away from seam-based air units to now no seam, which I don't know if it has an impact on the cushion as well, but I would assume probably so, because they were bigger when they had the seam.
What it is the seam was across the center. Here, the seam is down at the bottom.
It's in the bottom, right? Yeah.
It's just how it's made. This one, they kind of draw into the mold down and then do the cap when they blow mold it. Whereas the old one, it was a split center mold with a, symmetrical
cup. Yeah.
But I mean, that can have an effect on it too. I mean, by getting away from the seam across the center edge, some people would complain of, if they wore these with shorts or whatever, that raw edge from the trim would cut their ankles or the calves and things. So there's a lot of things that affect on how you build these things. So
at Nike, other than the Air Max, what else you worked on? I know you worked on the original the Zoom Spiridon.
The Cage Zoom Spiridon.
Yeah.
And then actually on the Cage Zoom technology, I did a lot of the Japanese specialty running projects, all the Ekidens and Katanas, and did a lot of track and field. I did the Shocks Monster Fly Spike, this one. So this one was kind of cool because Sean Crawford ended up getting gold medal at the Olympics.
This is an amazing looking concept.
Yeah, it did really well. The ultimate thing on the field of play is gold medals in the Olympics, and this thing got several of them and several silvers, depending on which athletes were running in it at the time. It also ended up becoming the front page of the annual report.
Yeah.
It was very important for Nike, which was cool. And then I did the Shocks Monster, which was the trainer version of this that sold, and seeing like 2.5 million pairs.
Wow. Just to make a quick return back, I just looked on the side. Do you remember who worked on this shoe?
Double cross trainer.
That is the Graphlite Pro.
Dave Prescar.
Oh, okay. So I'm on the trainers. This was one of my favorite. Actually, I bought this one when it came out, and I wore it for like 7 years until it fell apart. I love that one. It was so comfortable.
He did a lot of the preseason product, like the big
Yes.
and things like that. Dave did some amazing cross training product and cleats.
And this is a New Balance that I always liked as well. Just the design looks very clean to me. The 850. Yes, the 850.
I'm not sure who did that one. It might have even been Brownie or Johnny Morris.
So at Nike, you spent what, 5-6 years?
10.5 years.
10.5. Wow.
Yeah. So I was doing innovation for running. I worked on follow-ups to the Mayfly called the Vaporfly, and then again a lot of track and field. I did an Olympic shooting shoe, which again gold medals for the U.S. team and Chinese teams with the Olympic shooting shoe.
Yeah.
Then the last 2 years I was there, I was the manager of girls and toddler footwear design, and kids was like, why do you want to come work in kids from running? And it's like, well, it's the complete opposite, and you guys could use my help. So it was fun there. I did packaging, I did infant crib shoes, just everything for kids. And my daughter was going to be born at the time, so it was pretty cool because I could have the consumer at home to study.
I was just going to say, was you were impacted because of the time you actually start having your own kids? Were you thinking that way? What can I improve to actually impact everybody's lives?
Yeah, because kids product was pretty crappy, so it was a good opportunity to really upgrade the kids product.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Excellent. So you kind of hinted the last time that there will be some good news coming. I'm not going to ask you about that. I'm sure whenever you're ready, you're going to announce it, and we all going to know about it.
Yeah, there's some interesting changes happening. So
But I'm really excited. I'm sure you're double excited, but I'm really excited to see what's going to come out of, because I think you have plenty of future and creating some exciting things, and obviously it's going to be exciting for everybody.
Yeah, again, like I said, I never set out to create iconic product, but everywhere I've been, I've done it. So we'll see what the future holds. There's some interesting things swirling about, so we'll see. There's some
awesome
companies that need my help.
Awesome. I'm super excited. I can't wait to see what it is. We'll keep in touch, and hopefully we'll talk again in the future and make sure that I'm staying on the tracks and following your career as it progresses, since I've been doing it for the last 25 years. And you mentioned that you might be coming to Atlanta, so hopefully that's going to happen.
Yeah, I gotta see about that one. They're talking to me about the rise of sneaker culture. I was interested in maybe coming down for the one in Georgia, but now they're going to expand it out to Oakland. So I might end up going to the Oakland one, but it's much later in the summer. Okay. So we'll see. They want me to come down and maybe give a little talk and bring some of my original samples and stuff to put in the exhibit.
That will be amazing. Yeah, I definitely will make sure to meet you and come down there if that happens. If not, whatever happens in the future, I might have some trips going out on the West Coast, or whatever in the future you come down here, we can try to meet up.
Definitely.
Excellent. Well, again, huge thank you. It was absolutely amazing to hear all the stories. I've been following closely a lot of them, but some details, as always, are not revealed, and you're the only one to know them, which it's really absolutely amazing and mind-blowing to hear how things were done and how everything progressed over the time and over the future with the different companies, and how many different models that are considered iconic today. People don't even realize that you stand behind those models, and you actually used your passion and your force of future thinking to push them through so they can be released and all of us can enjoy them today. So, from my perspective and from everybody that is a fan of your product, big thank you for your creations and everything else. And I wish you all the best in the future. I'm sure we're going to be seeing more and more to come from you. So it will be exciting times.
Definitely.
All right. Well, again, thank you again for everything, and we'll keep in touch. And hopefully we'll see each other sometime in the future.
All right. There's more stories to share all the time.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I can't wait to talk to you face to face and share some more stories and some more passion about footwear that both of us share.
All right. Signing out from Oregon.
Me too. Bye bye. Thank you, Steven.
Yeah.